Okay, so you know how you sent us that Q3 FY25 earnings call transcript for TD Power Systems Limited?
Uh-huh.
Well, we went through it all, and we're ready to take a deep dive into it for you, really try to pull out the crucial information.
Yeah.
The goal is to give you a clear and concise understanding of, where this company stands right now, and perhaps even more importantly, where it looks like it's headed.
Right.
So think of this as like your fast track to understanding this sometimes dense document.
Yeah. We've processed all the details and we'll be sharing those insights with you, focusing on the most important aspects for you today.
Right.
We'll look at, their different business segments, try to understand what's driving their current performance, and then zoom out and look at the industry landscape, both globally and specifically in India, to get some context. And of course, we'll dive into their future projections and plans and critically examine the key risks that could impact their trajectory.
Okay, so let's jump right in. And to start, I think it's helpful to understand what TD Power Systems actually does. When we look at their business segments, manufacturing really stands out. They have a huge order book right now of INR 13.09 billion.
Wow.
Now, if we break that down further, the core manufacturing side of things accounts for INR 9.6 billion of that. And then they've got their railway business, which is at INR 3.33 billion.
Okay.
Plus, they have smaller contributions from sales and aftermarket and their operations in Turkey. But I think what's interesting and something for you to think about is just how big that core manufacturing order book is compared to these other segments.
Right.
It really highlights where their primary strength and focus is.
That's a really good point. And their global reach is also quite impressive. A significant portion of their manufacturing order book, specifically 66%, excluding the railway business, comes from exports and what they call deemed exports. So basically business outside of India.
Right.
This really shows how competitive they are on an international level. And this past quarter was especially strong for them in terms of new business. They had a record high order inflow of INR 4.07 billion. That's a big jump, 52% up from the previous quarter and 40% higher than the same period last year.
That's impressive. Now, of that new business, how does it split between international and domestic orders?
Yeah, so of that INR 4.07 billion, 71% is from exports, and the remaining 29% is domestic.
Okay.
So clearly exports are a major focus for them. But there's an interesting trend emerging on the domestic side. If we look at their domestic order inflow over the past 3 quarters, it's actually been steadily increasing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it started at INR 0.81 billion, then went up to INR 0.96 billion, and in this most recent quarter, it jumped to INR 1.36 billion.
So a steady upward climb.
Exactly. Now, their overall domestic order inflow for the 9-month period is still down 10% year on year. But this consistent increase quarter on quarter definitely suggests positive momentum. And they seem quite confident that this trend will continue into the next fiscal year.
So what's driving all of this activity? It sounds like the international markets are really fueling their growth right now.
You're absolutely right. Their export business, and specifically their generators and motors for gas turbines and gas engines, is the main catalyst. They're seeing strong demand coming from several key areas. For example, combined heat and power plants. These are facilities that generate both electricity and thermal energy.
Makes sense. Very efficient.
Exactly. And then there's the huge and rapidly expanding AI and data center sector. These facilities need massive amounts of reliable power.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And they're also getting business from grid stabilization units, which are becoming increasingly vital with all the growth in renewable energy. And then, unfortunately, there's also the situation in Ukraine, which has led to increased demand for gas engine and turbine technology.
Right.
So a variety of factors all contributing to their success in these international markets.
Now, they also mention a significant order they won in Turkey, which seemed to make them quite happy.
Yes, that was a key development. It's a EUR 0.26 billion order, and it's expected to be executed in FY26. Which is significant, especially since they haven't had as much business coming from Turkey lately. They see it as a very positive signal for future opportunities in that region. And another interesting aspect of these Turkish orders is that they're all in euros, which actually provides a natural hedge against the high inflation in Turkey.
Oh, that's smart. So it's not just about generators for them, though, right? They've also been making progress with their motors business.
That's right. They were quite keen to highlight the progress they're making in the motors market. They're focusing on building what they call references. Basically, these are successful projects and satisfied clients that they can point to, which they believe is essential for winning larger and more significant orders in the future.
Oh, I see.
A good example they gave was an order they received from the Nuclear Power Corporation in the 4th quarter, worth about INR 0.5 billion. They specifically mentioned this as a big win for their motors segment.
Oh.
So overall, across both generators and motors, it's clear that the export business is the key driver for them right now, fueled by demand from a diverse range of international markets and industries.
And looking ahead, they seem particularly excited about the potential they see in traction motors.
Yes. They mentioned upcoming traction motor orders from Europe, the U.S., and the CIS region, so that suggests a potentially big growth opportunity for them. They think they could triple their current traction motor business, which is currently around INR 1 to 1.2 billion.
Wow, that's a lot of growth. Okay, so we've got a good handle on their current business segments and what's driving their success.
Yes.
Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader industry landscape they're operating in.
Sure.
Starting with those international markets that are contributing so much to their growth, what are they seeing out there?
Well, first of all, that impressive 88% year-on-year growth in export order inflow really highlights the strength of these international markets for TD Power Systems.
Right.
They're particularly bullish about the sustained high demand they're seeing for gas turbine and gas engine generators.
Yeah.
And they think this will continue for at least the next 6 to 8 quarters.
Wow, so they're really looking ahead.
Yeah, they're definitely thinking long term. And a lot of this demand is driven by that boom in AI and data centers we talked about, especially in the U.S., which requires a ton of reliable power infrastructure.
Right. Data centers are power hungry. Now, what about the current situation with wind projects in the U.S.? They mentioned a bit of a hold on those.
Right.
Could that actually benefit their gas turbine business?
That's what they're thinking. They believe that with the slowdown in wind energy development, the demand for reliable gas turbine power generation might actually increase to fill a gap.
Interesting. Okay, and then they also highlighted the growing need for grid stabilization units in Europe.
Yes. And that makes sense with Europe's increasing reliance on renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which are great, but they can be intermittent. So these grid stabilization units are crucial for maintaining a stable and reliable power grid. And that's creating new opportunities for companies like TD Power Systems.
So lots of potential there.
Yep. And as we discussed earlier, they're also seeing encouraging signs of a recovery and increased activity in the Turkish market.
All right, so let's shift our focus now to the domestic market in India.
Okay.
India has a huge and growing need for power.
For sure.
So how does TD Power Systems view their opportunities there?
Well, they acknowledge the high demand for power in India, but they also emphasize that their domestic business is heavily influenced by the overall investment climate within the country.
Right, of course.
Their main focus in India is on steam turbines for what are called captive power plants.
Captive power plants.
Yeah, basically these are power generation facilities that are built and operated by large industrial consumers for their own use.
Oh, I see. Like a company generating its own power.
Exactly. Now, as we mentioned before, their domestic order inflow is showing that encouraging upward trend. But overall, their expectation for growth in the domestic market is a bit more moderate, probably around 8 to 10% per year. And they see this growth mainly coming from sectors like steel and cement, where there's a need for waste heat recovery and basic power generation.
Okay.
They also see some potential in small hydro projects in India, specifically those below 25 megawatts.
Right.
And it's worth noting that their domestic gas engine generator business is currently very small.
Okay, so beyond these established areas, what about some of the emerging sectors? What new technologies or industries are TD Power Systems keeping an eye on?
Well, there are several areas that they're watching with interest.
Okay, great.
First, they see significant long-term potential in the nuclear power plant sector in India. Initially, they think the focus will be on replacing existing equipment in older plants, especially those that were originally equipped with Russian technology.
Makes sense.
But over time, they expect more opportunities to arise from the development of brand new nuclear power plants in the country.
Okay.
Another potentially huge opportunity they've identified is the customized motors market. They estimate this market to be 10 to 15 times larger than the generator market.
Wow.
And their goal is to really make a dent in that market over the next 3 to 4 years. They're also bidding on geothermal projects in the United States.
Geothermal.
Yeah, and these could be very large-scale projects.
Yeah.
Potentially in the gigawatt range. And they mentioned possible power purchase agreements with major IT companies.
Oh, wow. So they're really thinking big.
Absolutely. Now, they haven't won any new orders in the geothermal space lately, but it definitely shows they're exploring new energy frontiers. And they're also preparing for the future use of hydrogen as a fuel source in gas turbines. They're aligning themselves with their existing customers who are involved in hydrogen development, so they're trying to be ready for that transition.
That's smart. Now, with all this talk about different power generation technologies, what about battery storage systems? Those seem to be getting a lot of attention lately.
Yeah, they definitely acknowledge the interest in battery storage.
Yeah.
But right now, they view it as a relatively small and expensive part of the overall power generation mix, and they don't see it having a major impact on their large-scale power generation business in the next 6 to 8 quarters, especially when it comes to providing longer duration backup power solutions.
Okay, so that gives us a comprehensive view of the industry outlook as they see it.
Right.
Now let's zoom in on TD Power Systems' own future. What are their financial targets and what kind of growth are they projecting?
Well, they've reaffirmed their revenue guidance for FY25 at INR 12.75 billion. And for the next fiscal year, FY26, they're initially guiding for INR 15 billion in revenue.
Okay.
But importantly, they've indicated that there's potential for that number to go even higher depending on how their order inflow continues.
Interesting. And for FY27, do they have a specific target?
They haven't given a specific revenue target for FY27 yet, but their broader goal is to achieve a compound annual growth rate of 20% moving forward.
20% per year. That's ambitious.
It is.
To reach that kind of growth, they must have plans to expand their production capacity.
Oh, absolutely. Their new manufacturing plant is on track to be commissioned in phases during the first quarter of FY26, and they expect it to be fully operational by the second quarter of that same fiscal year. Once it's up and running, it will increase their total production capacity to INR 18 billion.
Wow.
Which is a big jump from their current capacity of INR 12.5 billion. But they're not stopping there. They're also focusing on improving efficiency and throughput in both their existing and new facilities. They're using methodologies like Kaizen and lean manufacturing to really optimize their operations.
So trying to get the most out of what they have.
Exactly. Their internal goal is to potentially achieve an output of around INR 23 billion without even needing a fourth plant, at least not until after FY28.
That's impressive. So they're really focused on doing more with less.
Yes, very much so.
Now, what about their profitability? What kind of margins are they expecting?
For FY26, they're projecting an EBITDA margin in the range of 17 to 18%, with around 17.5% being a realistic expectation. This takes into account the initial ramp-up costs of the new plant and their anticipated product mix.
Okay.
They believe their margins will improve further once the new plant is fully operational and those costs are absorbed, probably towards the end of FY26 and into FY27. They did mention a slight dip in gross margins in the most recent quarter,
Right.
which they attributed to product mix and currency fluctuations.
Right.
But overall, their outlook for gross profit contribution remains positive. They also expect to see good margins from their motors business since it's quite specialized.
Yeah.
And as the volume of motor sales grows, that should help improve their overall margin profile.
That makes sense. So it seems like they've got some ambitious plans for growth, backed by capacity expansion and this strong focus on efficiency.
Definitely.
But what are the key strategic priorities they'll be focusing on to make this all happen?
Well, their immediate priority is to execute on their current, strong order book and make sure they deliver to their customers on time.
Of course.
In their motors business, a key strategy is to continue building that strong track record and getting those positive references, since that's so important for winning those bigger and more complex orders in the future. And their overall strategic objective is to significantly increase their share of the global market. They believe they're only scratching the surface of their potential right now.
Okay, so a lot to be optimistic about. But as with any business, there are always potential challenges and risks on the horizon.
Right.
What are some of the key risks that TD Power Systems is currently facing?
There are a few things that could potentially pose challenges for them. One is the impact of U.S. tariffs on their exports, which currently make up about 8% of their total revenue. They do think that the 2-year qualification requirement for alternative suppliers in the U.S. provides some protection in the short term, and they expect to pass on any immediate tariff costs to their customers. But they are looking at longer-term strategies to address this risk, such as potentially using their plant in Turkey for U.S.-bound exports.
Interesting.
Setting up a manufacturing base in the U.S. is less appealing to them because of the costs involved.
Makes sense.
Another inherent risk for them is currency fluctuations. Since they have so much international business,
Right.
they have quite a bit of exposure to the euro, and the euro's been weakening against the dollar. And that can put pressure on their margins, even though they do use forward hedging to try to mitigate that.
Right.
Another big risk factor is the successful and timely execution of their capacity expansion plans.
Hmm.
If there are any delays in getting that new plant up and running, it could impact their ability to meet the growing demand and hit their financial targets.
For sure, that's a big one.
And while their strong focus on export markets is a key strength, it also makes them vulnerable in certain ways.
How so?
Well, their reliance on international markets means they're susceptible to global economic downturns and geopolitical events,
Right.
which could impact demand or create new challenges for them.
Okay.
Competition is another ongoing risk. They face established local suppliers in Europe, so they have to stay competitive on price and quality to keep winning those bids, especially for the prime movers like turbines and engines.
So they can't afford to get complacent.
Not at all. There's also some uncertainty about the renewal of a large traction motor order with Alstom after FY29, so that's something to keep an eye on. And finally, they've mentioned the challenges they face in winning profitable orders for wind turbine generators,
Yeah.
because of some unfavorable liability clauses that are often included in contracts.
Oh, so that's why they're not focusing on wind as much.
Exactly. They're not prioritizing that segment for future growth right now.
Okay, so that was a very thorough overview of TD Power Systems based on their latest earnings call.
It was.
To recap for you, the listener, what are the key takeaways here?
Okay, so to sum it up, we're looking at a company that's experiencing strong growth, driven largely by international demand for their gas turbine and engine generators.
Right.
They're also seeing positive signs of growth in the domestic market. And there's significant future potential in their motors business. Plus, they're strategically moving into new sectors like nuclear and geothermal energy.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah, now they do face some risks, like potential tariffs, currency fluctuations, and the execution of their expansion plans. But overall, the outlook appears positive, with a clear focus on capitalizing on the global demand for power.
And they seem quite confident in their ability to meet that demand and achieve their growth targets, especially with their upcoming production capacity expansion and their efforts to improve efficiency.
Yeah, that's the key message they're trying to convey.
So for you, the listener, here's something to ponder. Considering the ongoing trends in global power demand, especially the rapid growth of AI and data centers, and TD Power Systems moves into areas like customized motors and their preparations for the hydrogen economy, what could be the next unexpected catalyst for growth for this company, something beyond these current projections?
Yeah, good question.
It's really interesting to think about the evolving energy landscape and where a company like this, with its capabilities, might find its next big opportunity.
A lot to consider, for sure.
All right, well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into TD Power Systems. We'll catch you next time.